He's the executive chairman of a cultural icon, the original American brand. Bill Ford, thank you for being on Cars and Culture. It's an honor to have you on the program.
Well, thank you, Jason. It's great to see you again.
Let's start with where we find you today. You're at home, which is actually where you spent most of the last couple of years, and I want to get to that special connection that actually created with some 25,000 folks who joined you. But I know that this has been anything but a standard, typical year for you. Not that any year is typical, but oftentimes legacies shine during extraordinary times, and you've had to shine from your home office. That must have been different for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was very strange. It took a while to get used to, and frankly, I really missed being with everybody. And so, I'm not just tethered to my office. I'm out a lot. I get out and particularly to go to our plants and where our people are congregating. But yeah, I've had a lot of Zoom meetings from home, as have many people, and um, you know. I'm really looking forward to getting back to life as we all used to know it.
When salaried employees were sent home indefinitely, you hosted those weekly town halls from your office.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, you had these enormous connections that occurred with so many of your employees. And in some cases, it was a chance to develop a bit of an intimacy, I suppose, with teammates who you had not had before. I'm guessing as you reflect on that, that was a pivotal moment for you.
I really enjoyed it. The weekly town halls were something I would look forward to, and then I'd get all the feedback. And then I kind of morphed from there actually to start. I started having meetings with small groups of employees at all levels throughout the week and throughout the month because sitting at home, I decided I better make the best of it. So it's been great. The connections I've been able to make and the kind of meetings you can have with 5, 10, 20 employees is something that I look forward to every week.
And all of a sudden, you had folks asking you casually about the books on your shelf behind you. Is that right?
Yeah, I had to start to rearrange a few because in today's age of political correctness, you never know what might show up that would embarrass you. So um, it's the world that we live in, I guess. But yeah, it was funny. I mean, people would start to comment on the shirt I was wearing, my haircut, and everything else in between.
But COVID brought you closer, ironically.
Well, it did. It was uncharted water. We had no idea, how we were going to, actually operate as a company in a world where we couldn't actually get together. So, we started this global town hall. Jim Hackett and I did when he was the CEO, and they seemed to really go over well. And we picked different topics every week, but then we also had a big open session where they could ask us anything that was on their mind. And it was fun. I love it, and I kind of love the unscripted part of it all. I'm not one for a lot of pre-prepared material. I'd rather just wing it.
By your own estimation, you've lived through 6 major crises.
Mhm.
I'm sure you could probably list them if I asked you to. How does this one shape up relative to the others?
Well, every crisis is different, but the one thing that you have to cling to through any crisis are the values you have as a company and as a person, because ultimately those are what get you through the crisis, and it also is what allows the employees to believe that tomorrow is going to be a better day. Um, because at the end of the day, if any company is just a paycheck, when things turn bad, they're going to leave you. But if they believe in you as a leader, and more importantly, they believe in the company and the mission the company is on, then they're going to hang with you. And not only are they going to hang with you, they're going to pull you through it. And I saw that during the darkest days of the financial crisis when our two big competitors went bankrupt, and I started getting flooded with letters, emails from all parts of the company, including from the plant floor, saying, "Hey, Bill, don't give up. We can do this." Well, normally those kind of messages are top down, but these were all coming to me, telling me not to give up. And I'll never forget also that during that same horrible period, our employees were working till midnight, 1 in the morning, no extra pay, weren't even sure they were going to have a job on Monday morning. But they believed in the company, they loved our company, and they were going to do everything that possible to get us through it. And guess what? They did. And I will remember that till the day I die.
One of the pivotal moments during the course of the last 2 years was was the point when you're really credited with pulling the Detroit Three and the United Auto Workers together. This is around March of 2020, making that bold decision to collectively close North American plants. Unprecedented, not only in the closures, but I would say in the unity of bitter rivals coming together. And that was a collective decision against what was then a dire threat. What was that like in the darkest hour?
Well, first of all, I suppose if you're in a job long enough, you develop a lot of relationships, and I had a relationship, with both General Motors and with Stellantis, and also with the UAW. So I felt that it was important to get us all on the same page and to really face as you point out, was an unprecedented crisis facing our industry. And yeah, we compete like crazy every day in the marketplace, but we also share a lot of similar issues, and we face a lot of similar problems. And it just seemed to me that if we all kind of got on the same page, the UAW, Ford, Stellantis, and General Motors, that we could actually start to make some sense of the position we were all in, and all asking ourselves the same questions, frankly.
You got on the phone and placed calls to Mary Barra, CEO of General Motors, John Elkann, the chairman of Fiat Chrysler Automobiles at the time,
Mhm.
UAW President Rory Gamble. You talked at levels of government, but you had, most importantly, a philosophy, Bill. You said you just realize you're never dealing with perfect information, so the more communication you have, the better. You were also, I'm guessing, looking for a common understanding among players who did not normally have common understandings. And you said you felt like Switzerland. How so?
Well, I kind of did, because if you remember back then, GM was suing Stellantis, and so there was some bad blood there. Rory was a relatively new head of the UAW, and he had come from Ford, so I'd known Rory for many years, and I felt that he and I had a level of trust and an understanding that we could work well together. And I felt that maybe Mary and John Elkin didn't know Rory nearly as well, and therefore, hadn't developed that relationship. So I felt like, I really was in a position to not only pull everyone together, but, to make sure that, we all, well, first of all, we were all facing the same issues. But secondly, that we all kind of had some common understanding of what those issues were and what our options were, frankly, as an industry. We had never, as an industry, shut down plants all around the world before. Everything just shut down. And it was a very scary time, and there was no playbook.
No playbook, and yet a Project Apollo. And I want to talk to you about something that I think I'm going to guess is a high watermark in your own legacy. You, as part of Project Apollo, were able to get forward on the path to manufacturing masks and gowns and ventilators and respirators as part of a huge pivot. This was wartime, Willow Run type stuff,
Yeah.
right, Bill?
Yeah, it absolutely was. Look, one of the things I said to our company is we've been there whenever our country has needed us, through two world wars, through the post-war boom, whether it's ambulances or fire trucks or police cars. I mean, whatever is needed from society, we've been there. Well, guess what? Society needed us again. They needed us to gear up and to help the country, and in this case, many countries, but I'll focus for now on the U.S., to help this country through an unprecedented crisis. And so, yeah, it was very much like wartime footing. We stopped making cars, and we started making PPE equipment in great numbers. Because one of the things that became very clear to me in the very early days was there were companies out there that knew how to make respirators and ventilators, but they didn't know how to make a lot of them. And there were companies out there, making small batches of gowns and face masks and shields, but we could make huge numbers of them. So, our team just went to work, and I've never been so proud of our company because everybody volunteered. There was nobody. This was a very scary time, as you recall, and COVID was a very virulent thing back then, still is, but at least now we have a few treatments. Back then there was nothing, and yet our employees volunteered in great numbers to come to work and to get to work on this for the country.
And you personally toured the plants where that medical equipment was made. And a very poignant moment. Somebody came up to you, Bill, and said they had always regretted that they hadn't served in the military. This was their opportunity to give back. Do you remember that?
I certainly do. And and there were many moments like that. There was another lady who came up to me who said she was doing this for her mother who had died of COVID. And and almost everybody there had a story, maybe not quite as poignant as those, but they all said, the reason they were there was they wanted to help. And as I say, because they didn't have to be there, and they all volunteered. And it was so. I mean, I felt so privileged to be part of that and to be with those people.
What do you believe will be the lasting impact of the pandemic on Ford?
Boy, that's hard to know. The one thing that we completely missed was we thought when the pandemic hit that sales were going to stop. I mean, we thought it was going to be like the financial crisis all over again, where people simply weren't going to buy vehicles. And I think we really didn't understand what was about to happen, which was that in many ways, cars and trucks became the ultimate PPE equipment, right? People didn't want to get into public transport. They didn't want to get into shared forms of transportation. And even people living in cities who hadn't owned a vehicle before were showing up at dealerships, saying, "I need to buy one." So the sales boom, if you will, that happened during COVID was something that we completely had miscalled. We, Ford, and probably the whole industry. So that was an interesting kind of development of COVID that we hadn't foreseen. And I think in terms of, the lasting impact, it's going to be really hard to know. But one thing for sure is that our workforce has told us quite definitively, our salaried workforce, that going forward, the old days of coming into the office for 10 hours a day or more is something that they perhaps don't really want to do. And they'd like more flexibility in their life. And so we're trying to figure out what does that mean in a post-COVID world. So I do think the way people are going to work it will change. Now, many people can't change the way they work, obviously, because they're needed to be on the job at the site, and that's true both hourly and salary in many cases. But where there is flexibility, people would like some flexibility, and we're trying to figure out exactly what that looks like.
And in fact, was even announced recently that team members can take advantage of short-term remote work for up to 30 days per year without having to come on site for that period. So if
Yeah,
you're a
and
Detroit.
and Jason, this will all evolve too, because look, we're kind of shooting in the dark now. We really don't know ultimately, what it's all going to look like, and what people are really going to want, and what we Ford are really going to require in terms of getting everyone together. So we're starting with some few, with a few, sort of stakes in the ground, if you will. But my guess is that 6 months after we get back to work, it'll start to look quite different, and we'll evolve this as we go.
So as if COVID isn't enough, Bill, then we get into semiconductors, the
Yep.
smallest part that creates the biggest problem. And things are improving, but I'm guessing that you could not have ever envisioned a pandemic followed by a global part shortage because of the pandemic.
Well, look, it's never dull in this business, and no 2 days are ever alike. So, and we've dealt with a lot of different crises and different world events, and some of which we are in control of, and much of which we're not. But I think we've done a pretty good job of navigating through this. Jim Farley is a fantastic CEO, and he's done just a great job of getting us well positioned. Um, but yeah, it's been challenging, and it will continue to be challenging, I think, for some time. I think the other thing that we're seeing now is as we're switching to EVs, and our industry is starting to gear up to a software kind of industry and an EV kind of industry. We it's almost like in my great grandfather's day, where the supply base, in many respects, is not fully developed. And in some respects, you're better off doing it yourself. And so, it's really been interesting to watch us start to evolve our thinking on vertical integration and all these kinds of things. That when I go back to my great grandfather's day was something that they did and then took for granted, and then we of course got away from it. So I think the way everything is evolving now, um, the way that our supply base, the way we as an industry, we're in a time of profound change, and in that kind of change, there are going to be disruptions, and so we're just going to have to get used to dealing with disruptions and making the best of it, and we are.
Speaking of EVs, you were an EV crusader before it was cool, Bill,
Yeah, actually, I
because
had the first. It was a lead acid Ranger, a lead acid battery Ranger that was. It was so full of batteries and so heavy that basically there was no room for anything but a driver and a passenger, and literally nothing else. And the range was about 60 miles. That was my. I had the very first one. I had a charger at my house. The good news,
when
though,
was
is
that?
oh my goodness, this is 20 years ago. And the chemistries, of course, have all changed. Then, we started with lead acid. We've had, a nickel metal hydride. We've had sodium sulfur. We're now at lithium ion, and the chemistries and each time it changes, the batteries get better, the range gets better, the kind of space that it takes up gets less. So, obviously, there's been that Ranger that I just referenced, that was not ready for prime time. There was no chance we could actually sell that to a retail buyer. But I think it was indicative of the path that I wanted Ford to be on, and the kind of pursuit of technology that would lead us to a cleaner future that I felt we had to have.
In fact, you were talking about it 10 years ago in a Fortune article in 2011. You talked about green cars and the automaker's efforts to potentially electrify its fleet. And while not everything happened exactly the way that you wrote about then, you were ahead of your time on several things, including the fact that electric vehicles will have real time information flowing through them. Again, this is 2011, Bill. And you're talking about smartphones that are checking how much juice is left in your car. We all know that's going to happen. We're talking about Wi Fi for cars at the time. Again, true. And you talked about the movement that needed to take place within the industry, and a lot of people looked at that back in 2011 and said, "Well, it's unrealistic to think 2020." And now here we are. You're launching and have launched a Mach-E Mustang. You have an electrified F-150 that is electrifying the industry coming, and of course, there's more on the way. Ford's gonna spend 40 to $45 billion in CapEx between 2020 and 2025, and 30 billion of that will be dedicated to EVs. So somebody finally listened to you.
Yeah, it was really frustrating. I think, particularly, 10, 15 years ago, I could see that our world was going to change dramatically. And I could see that Detroit in general, including Ford, was asleep at the switch and wasn't ready for it. And as a result, I founded my own venture capital firm to invest in a lot of these future solutions because I could see that the OEMs just weren't ready to do it. But I knew we'd hit a tipping point, and once we hit the tipping point, then everyone would be in a race to the future, and frankly, we're in that now. So I think all the OEMs are awake. Everybody's racing hard to the future. Do I wish it had happened sooner? Yeah, I do. And all you have to do is look at Tesla, and it's interesting. I went out to see Tesla. When it was people think Elon Musk founded it. Actually, I went to see Tesla when the CEO was a guy named Martin Eberhard, and I don't know if you remember, but the only vehicle they had was the little Lotus-derived
Lotus.
sports
Mhm.
car. And I came back to Detroit, and I said, hey, I just was out visiting this company that was really, really interesting, called Tesla, and it's an EV. And I said, the fit and finish isn't very good, and it's basically a prototype, but the thing is a blast to drive, and I think they're onto something. And our engineers just kind of laughed and said, oh yeah, we're aware that they're not going to be anything. And that's when I was convinced that okay, you know, we need to open our eyes. And Tesla obviously had the playing field all to themselves for quite some time because the OEMs across the industry just had their eyes closed.
Was that Detroit arrogance?
Yeah, I think so actually, but it wasn't just Detroit. Frankly, it was Germany, it was Japan. I think it was the whole auto industry. It wasn't just Detroit.
Industry arrogance.
Yeah, I think it was sort of the not invented here syndrome that all the big players, whether it was Ford, Toyota, General Motors, Volkswagen, you go down the list, they all felt like, hey, we're doing a ton of advanced research ourselves. We're looking at things like fuel cells and compressed natural gas and all these different things, and so what Tesla's doing, frankly, isn't all that interesting. And they completely missed the point that it wasn't just the propulsion system that Tesla was doing, but it was also things like over-the-air update, all the software that went into it, the customer experience, all the things that they were experimenting with. So, um, yeah, I mean,
So how could Tesla do it then?
well, look, they had it. They had the game to themselves for a long time, and they were able to experiment and iterate. And now, though, I feel like we are not only in the fight, but we are in the fight to win. And it's going to be. I can't wait to see what the future is going to hold because, I like our chances very much. It's interesting. Most everybody focuses on the retail buyer, and they should. But there's also the professional segment, and that's something that we are in the process of electrifying. We've set up our own division called Ford Pro that's going to use technology and use software to make anybody who's in the professional world, whether you're a tradesman or a big fleet, make your life easier and better and more usable. I think those kind of things, the software, the getting to the customer in a way that they've never interacted with before. Those kinds of things that Tesla was starting to, well, not starting to, but they were innovating in that space. All of a sudden, has become a very crowded and interesting space. And as I say, I very much like where we're positioned.
Well, and where you are positioned is with some interesting vehicles, and I mentioned a couple of them. Let's talk about the development of the Mach-E.
Yep.
You were a guy when it first was, shown to you or the concept was rolled out that went, are we gonna mess with the Mustang like this? You remember those days?
Oh, I sure do. Listen, I loved I still do love Mustangs, and I've got probably too many of them. Um, but I felt that the Mustang was such a powerful brand for us. And when I saw what I thought was going to be an EV SUV and calling it a Mustang, I just the tilt sign went on for me. And I thought that was just a terrible idea. And it wasn't until I got in the vehicle and drove it and realized, my goodness, this is a fantastic vehicle, that I completely changed my mind. Because I was really afraid that we were going to severely tarnish the Mustang name. And I had seen that elsewhere in our industry where, people had tried, quote, brand extension. And in fact, not only did it not work, they ended up tarnishing the entire brand. And I felt that Mustang was so well known for what it was good at that to try and take a vehicle that looked different and was powered differently and slapping a Mustang badge on it, I thought was going to be a big mistake. But once I got into it and drove it, I became an instant convert, and I've been driving one ever since. I absolutely love it, and I think that's the thing. You've got to get people in these vehicles for them to realize they're a blast, and actually, they're more fun in many respects than a big internal combustion engine. And so, I think the Mustang Owners Clubs had a lot of the same reactions that I did when we first rolled it out to them. It was like, "Are you kidding us? No chance." But then we got them in. But then we got them in it, and they had the same epiphany that I had.
Well, you are the gatekeeper of the brand to some extent, aren't you, Bill?
Yeah, but I'm not the only gatekeeper. I mean, those Mustang owner clubs, they think they're the gatekeepers, and in fact,
Mm.
many where they are. And I'll never forget years ago when we introduced the Mustang to Europe, and I did it at the Burj Khalifa in the Middle East, the tallest building in the world. And I look, we had a kind of a press conference. I looked out and I saw all these people wearing Mustang gear. So I walked over to them. I said, "Well, who are you guys?" And they said, "Well, we're the Mustang Club of, Slovakia." I said, "But we don't sell Mustangs in Slovakia." They said, "Yeah, we know, but we've been waiting." That's the kind of brand, presence that Mustang had, and that's what I was so worried about destroying. But in fact, I think the Mach-E is actually going to not only not destroy it, it's really going to enhance it.
You're good friends with RJ Scaringe,
I am.
Rivian, and, some big news obviously around Rivian and its IPO and Ford's investment in Rivian. Tell me about the first time that you met him and what you liked about Rivian and RJ?
Well, so meeting RJ, he's obviously a very smart guy. We both went to MIT, and I knew some of RJ's friends and some of his professors. And I'd heard about RJ long before I had met him. And then, of course, through the venture capital world, that I was involved with, I was aware of RJ and Rivian. But when you meet RJ, he's not at all what I guess I would have thought that he would have been.
He's not pretentious at all.
He's not pretentious. He's not. He's very thoughtful. He's very down to earth, and he's just a great guy. He's a very charming, wonderful guy that I enjoy personally very much, and I admire him very much for. Rivian wasn't just hatched yesterday. I mean, Rivian has been 10 years in the making, and RJ, was in stealth mode for a long, long, long time. And and that takes a lot of conviction to really dedicate your life to something that ultimately you don't really know how it's going to work out, because you're having to, that's a very long gestation period. And by the way, it's very capital intensive. It's going into a world that, traditionally you've got giant OEMs who, could have potentially crushed them at any point. He had to have had tremendous conviction and belief to do what he's done, and I admire him greatly.
I sat with him in the early days when probably 5 or 6 years ago when they, were talking about the plant in Normal, Illinois, which was a former Mitsubishi plant that they
Yes.
had taken over, and they had very little manufacturing knowledge, and now here we are with vehicles that are rolling. Let's talk about one more thing about EVs, the F-150 Lightning. You've gotta be just sitting and on pins and needles waiting for that vehicle to be released. You
Yeah,
got the attention of the president.
well, yeah, that was fun. Getting the president and let him be a leadfoot, which he was,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
had a blast. In fact, it's funny. He called me that night from Air Force One. He said it was one of the best days of his presidency, and I believe that's true. Because how many days does he get to have fun? And he really had a great, great time. Even though the Secret Service didn't want him to do it, he was determined to do it, and it was it was funny. I think somebody said, somebody asked him what his 0 to 60 time was, and I think he said 60. I was going 80, which he was. So, um, but no, the Lightning has been, I think, a real eye opener for a lot of people, because I think a lot of people thought, okay, well, Ford's just going to drop a battery in an F-150, and that's the end of the story. What they didn't realize is the capability of this vehicle is so different than a traditional F-150, that in many ways it can do more things. And I think that's what really surprised people, was the capability of this vehicle, not the fact that Ford dropped a battery in an F-150, but what that allowed the vehicle to do. Whether it's having all that room up front for tools or for tailgating, or all the connection points that you have in terms of plugging in, the fact that you can power a work site, you could power your home if you need to. I think all those things really kind of made people look at the vehicle in a totally different light. And yeah, I'm really
You
excited by it.
as are we. You were early on the whole notion that infrastructure needs to be an important part of the, American vision going forward as it related to EVs, as it relates to technology. And lo and behold, there's finally an infrastructure bill that's passed. $7.5 billion to help set up a national EV charging system. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we need that for sure. But actually, we need conventional infrastructure too. I mean, our roads are in tough shape. Our ports are not modern. Our airports could use some help. I mean, really, all the traditional kind of what you think of as infrastructure. Even the old FDR playbook of fixing infrastructure. A lot of that's still relevant. But yeah, there's a very much a future looking piece as well. Because infrastructure now includes, as you point out, things like EVs. So I'm really happy that it's passing. We need it, because it'll make everybody's life in this country trying to get from point A to point B much easier, whether you're doing it in an EV or a conventional vehicle.
Let's talk a little bit about you and your family. A fifth generation of the Ford family has joined the company's board of directors. Your daughter,
Mhm.
Alexandra Ford English, and your nephew. Henry Ford III. What does that mean to you?
Well, look, I think one of the things that makes Ford different is the fact that there is somebody there that's going to be accountable through thick and thin. That is not going to disappear with a golden parachute when when things get tough, and also, gives a face and a personality to a brand um, that has been that way for 118 years, and so I love the continuity, but only if they're good enough. And there was a big vetting process for both of them because the last thing that the company needs or the family needs is to put people on the Ford board who, frankly, aren't going to pull their weight. So I'm really excited that for both of them because they're both fantastic. They're both really devoted to the company and to the future success of the company, and they're both really smart. So I love it, and I love the fact that that they're now looking for the next 20, 30, 40 years down the road. And I just wish that I was 30 years younger and could be with them on the journey because I think it's going to be really, really fun.
Well, as you said before, throughout just about every imaginable challenge over the last 118 years, world wars, depressions, recessions, pandemics, the one constant has been your family. And I'm guessing that that's your compass as you chart out the next 118 years.
Well, it is, and I think it's important not only that you just have a family, but you actually have values behind that family, and that those values guide you when you're making decisions, because they won't always be popular. I mean, if I think even in the last few years when we decided to, side with California against the Trump administration on rolling back emission standards and, signing up to the Paris Accord and jumping into the PPE equipment during, COVID, those kind of decisions become a lot easier if you actually have values that you stand by and that are known throughout your organization. Decisions start to come easier then, even if they're not always popular decisions. So I think it's important to have family there, but I think it's important to have the family there with the right values and be ready to stand up for those values as well, because there's so much short-term pressure in business today to do the expedient thing, but you have to do the right thing. And if you do the right thing, it pays off in the long term. I'll always believe that. And I also believe that our employees feel so much better about the company if they believe that the company is standing behind the right thing. And by the way, there can always be disagreement over the decision, but there shouldn't be any disagreement behind the values about the values behind that decision.
There are many people who consider themselves part of the Ford family. You haven't maybe met all of them, but Ford, the part of the show is culture. This is cars and culture. Ford is culture, Bill.
Oh, you bet.
It's I it's a Ford Mustang, it's an F-150 truck that's either built Ford tough or built Ford proud, and there are 72 different artists and some 5,000 lyrics, you may or may not know this, that mention Ford, including a song out now by Robin Ottolini called F-150. It is all culture all the time about Ford. That has to be just amazing to you, I'm guessing, and also, somewhat of a burden.
Oh, it's never a burden. I think it's awesome. And I mean, it's everything as you point out, the Eagles sang about us in a flatbed Ford. I mean, you kind of go on and on with it. Yeah, it's very cool. And I live it every day. Every time I go out in public, which I do every day, people want to stop me and tell me their stories. And they want to tell me about the first vehicle they owned, or they want to tell me about their aunt or their grandmother or their grandfather that worked at Ford. Everybody wants to tell you their Ford connection, and I absolutely love that. And I think there's a tremendous reservoir of goodwill out there on Main Street towards Ford Motor Company. People want Ford to win. We just have to let them know that we are winning and we can win. And I think that and if you disappoint them, though, boy, do you hear about it. So if you come out with a vehicle that they don't like, or if we have a few years that we don't do very well in our business results, I think we hear about it more than the average company, because the passion for us is real and people want us to do well. And if we're not doing well, yeah, they'll let us know. But if we are doing well, they are so excited. And you see it. You see it at racetracks. You see it everywhere you go. There is people love Ford, and I'll never forget when we turned 100 years old. We had a reception in Washington, and up at the Capitol, and I was told, hey, look, a lot of the members themselves won't come. It'll be a lot of staffers, but don't be disappointed by that. Well, virtually every member showed up, and most of
Mm.
them had Ford stories that they had to tell me about, their father, had used to own a dealership, or their grandmother, worked on the assembly line. I mean, people that we had no idea that had connections to Ford in Congress couldn't wait to tell us their Ford stories, and that is very common, and I love that. The other thing is we have so many multi-generational employees at Ford, and that's different too. So whenever I go into our plants or any of our office buildings, people run up to me and tell me, I'm fourth generation also, just like you are. And then they'll tell me their Ford story, and it's something that I think is very special, and I hope we never lose.
How important is it to protect that
Oh, it's the most
cultural
important
element?
thing we have, frankly.
Mm.
Look, if we lose the hearts and minds of people, we're just another company, and it won't matter.
Yeah. Your stock has been, well, you described it as roaring recently. And I remember the days, Bill, 13 years ago or so when it was a buck 80
Yeah.
and Ford stock topped, as of this taping, $20 a share for the first time since September of 2001. How much does that mean to you?
Well, it's huge, and I think it's really a validation too of the course that we've set. I mean, I think I mentioned Jim Farley a minute ago. I mean, since Farley has taken over, the stock's more than doubled, and
72% in the last 6 months.
yeah, and Jim, and I, Jim Hackett laid a lot of the groundwork that we're seeing now come to fruition, and I think Jim Farley has done just a fantastic job, and will continue to. And I think we part of it though is intentionally we were quite quiet for some years. Well, why is that? Well, you remember, Jason, when everybody was saying back in like 2017 and 2018 on autonomous vehicles, oh, we're going to have X number on the road by 2019. We're going to have Y number by two. We didn't say anything. So then the impression was Ford's asleep at the switch. Well, the reason we didn't say anything is we knew that those weren't real. Same thing with EVs. A lot of our competitors were talking about all the things they were going to do. We were very quiet because we wanted to show people what we could do. So when we launched the Mach-E, there wasn't a lot of preamble to that. All of a sudden, we launched it, and everyone said, "Whoa, we didn't know Ford was working on that." And then the same thing with the Lightning. So I always have felt that it's better to steal Teddy Roosevelt's line, walk, softly and carry a big stick. I think that we should under promise and over deliver. And I think in our industry, we've seen a lot of the opposite. So I think there was a perception out there, and it was reflected in our stock that Ford wasn't in the game. And I think the last year, when we've really shown people what we've been up to and what we're capable of and what our future intent is, that investors have said, my goodness, Ford is in the game and we think they can win.
So you said validation. That's a key word. Wall Street seems to finally be validating your strategy. At the same time, we look at that other brand that we talked about earlier is has a market cap of 1.071 trillion,
Yep.
Tesla,
Yep.
and yet its revenue is a fraction of Ford Motor Company.
Yeah, and that just gives you though a
What
sense of
gives?
what our upside can be when we get this when we get this right, and we are getting it right. And I think that you know I'm so excited by our future because I believe that you know if we get this if we do this the way I believe we're going to do it, we're going to be less capital intensive, more revenue certain, higher margin as we go into the future with a brand image that is going to be even stronger than today. And and really making our customers' lives easier and better. And so I'm really, really excited by that. So, because Jason, look, you've been in this industry a long time, and so have I. And winning and losing, before this era has been just tenths of a points of market share, has been horsepower and styling, and that's really been about it. Now all of a sudden we're at the cusp of a very different era where you're going to have true winners and losers. The winners are going to do really well, and the losers are going to be out of business. I think the game has changed and the stakes have changed. But if you get it right, the rewards are going to be much higher.
You've said it recently about yourself. I feel like I'm adding value to Ford today, maybe more than I ever have before. What did you mean by that?
Well, I feel like, um, I'm at a stage in my career where I've seen a lot. I've been through a lot. I've dealt with. There's not much I haven't seen or dealt with, and I think a lot of our executives, are younger and haven't done that. So I feel there's a lot of kind of steadying the ship that I can do for our organization, but also, much more importantly, I've always been forward looking, and I've felt that our company in the past hasn't been really ready to act on it, but now they are, and I think Farley and I are in lockstep in terms of the future, how aggressively we have to go after it, and the kind of bets we're willing to make. And so, again, I feel like all the years of leaning into the future, contacts that I've made outside of Ford Motor Company, venture capital, all the things that I've invested in myself, are now coming back to Ford and allowing me to open doors for the company, introduce thought leaders to the company, and help craft a strategy, and then give Farley the air cover that he needs to go off and make it happen. So yeah, I do feel like I'm adding a lot to Ford now, and it feels really good.
10 years ago, you talked about grids and smart grids and car charging stations and batteries and electric vehicles. Give me 10 years from now. What does it all look like in 2031? Maybe for Ford.
Well, I think I mean, first of all, anything I will tell you will be wrong, but I'll give it a shot. So I do think, I'll give you the easy stuff first. The easy stuff is we'll have, a largely EV fleet, um, that charging will be ubiquitous, that fast charging will be, very available, and that it will be EVs, instead of being people's second and third car, will be their only vehicle. I think, though, you will also see we'll go back to the trend we saw pre-COVID of more shared transportation, and less, of everybody must, having their own vehicle. And therefore, the vehicles themselves will have more uptime, and less parking time. Autonomy will finally be here. I mean, despite all the promises that we saw, over the last decade, I think that reality will be, and you'll have both types of vehicles on the road, fully autonomous vehicles, but also vehicles with a lot of partial autonomy on the road, with drivers in the driver's seat. You'll have both. Um, and I think that, subscription models, will be very much a part of the financial equation. And as I said a minute ago, I think a lot of the companies whose names you would recognize 5 years ago won't be here by then. But there'll be new companies that will be there and adding value. And I think that you'll see many, many more partnerships between, OEMs and content providers, by that time, and all of which will make the customer's life much more seamless between leaving their house, getting in their car. It's everything will travel with them like it does today on their phone. Well, their phone will become, integrated into the car in a way that, but the phone itself will become so much smarter, and that we'll be able to anticipate what customers want and need, and again, as I say, make their life easier and better. Now, does that scare some people? Yeah, probably does. And there are some privacy issues and all kinds of tails that need to be worked out. But I think that's the world into which we're headed, and I believe that, in that time frame, all those things that I said will happen.
Will the industry then consolidate and get smaller?
I don't think so. In fact, I think if anything, it could get bigger, because you do have, rising GDPs around the world. You do have, rising middle class in many parts of the world, and I think that, that access to transportation is something that people are going to want. And actually, we will enable people getting out of poverty. So one of the things about there was a study at Harvard done not so long ago that said one of the big inhibitors for people getting out of poverty is they can't get to where the work is. Um, you think of ways cities have developed. Used to be that you worked in your neighborhood when couple generations ago. Well, now many of those jobs are out in the suburbs or even out in the countryside, and people are living in cities and they can't get to them. They might have to take 4 or 5 buses just to get to where the jobs are. But if we can actually enable autonomous driving and shared mobility such that people can be picked up and dropped off where the work is, then we can be accelerators for people getting out of poverty. And that alone, I think, will start to drive more demand. So I actually don't think I don't see the industry shrinking, but it will change, and it will change from individual ownership to more shared kind of ownership.
I have 2 final quick things for you, Bill. When you walk through those parking lots that you talked about earlier, and when you're out, as you said earlier, and you see a Ford product that's driving around or parked near you, what does that say to you? It's gotta be it still has to be a thrill.
Hey, my name's on it. Um, and and believe me, I noticed that.
I
But
bet you do.
but because my name's on it, I feel tremendous responsibility. And if I see it, honestly, if I see a car by the side of the road, the first thing I look at is for the logo. And if it's one of ours, my heart sinks. So yeah, it's something I live with and I love, and I wouldn't change for anything. But I do, you bet, I notice every car, not only in the parking lot, but everyone that on the road, I notice, whether it's one of ours or one of theirs.
Stocks and dividends aside, are you having the most fun that you've ever had?
I am. I absolutely love this. And I've said this before, but I wish I was 30 years younger. I mean, I just love the future of the company. All the things that I wanted to see happen and believed would happen, um, particularly in my career when other people said I was crazy, they're all happening now. Um, and I can't tell you how much fun that is to be part of something that is tremendous change. You know, look, in many ways, my great grandfather was the ultimate disruptor. And I think he would have been very disappointed at the rate of change that this industry had had from his day until about 3 years ago. And I think now, though, I mean, he would take a look at what we're doing and say, yeah, go for it. This is great. This is exactly what you should be doing. So, and not that I think of him every day, because I don't. I really think much more about the future than the past. But it really is interesting that an industry that has not had many revolutions over 100 years now is on the cusp of many revolutions, and I love it.
He is the executive chairman of Ford Motor Company. Bill Ford, thank you so much for spending time with me on Cars and Culture today.
Jason, thank you. This was a blast.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein,
former publisher of Automotive News,
is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.